There's a good chance that you've already heard of Starfield, and you've also heard of the biggest selling point: over 1,000 planets. And that's not 1,000 planets as part of the skybox. No, these are actual planets that you're able to visit. And considering the game is only going to be 130 gigabytes, which I know I still said only, that's fairly large, but considering there is over 1,000 planets at 130 gigabytes, that's actually very good. And it all comes down to one thing: procedural generation. And depending what type of player you say that to will depend on their reaction. In most cases, people don't really like procedural generation. And the reason is simply because there's not the same level of polish as if you were to handcraft something, both of which have their pros and cons. For example, if something was to be handcrafted, yes, it could be very detailed, can look amazing, but it's also going to take a very long time in order for someone, a studio, a full company for that matter, to handcraft each and every single element. With procedural generation, it's a lot easier in that you will set up rule sets instead. You'll say exactly what type of features you're looking for, what's needed, what's required, what's actually going to be included. And what's really cool with procedural generation is that no single instance will be the same, because it's going to use this rule set, but it's going to do it in a different way every single time. But it also means that there's going to be a lot of repeating patterns. This is what's required in order for it to fill the space. So with all of that in mind, how is Bethesda going to handle this? Is this going to be the case as that being over 1,000 planets, but pretty much every single planet more or less being the same, just with a few different colors? No, because they've actually blended the two. It is procedural generation with handcrafted elements. So let's actually cover the procedural generation part in itself. We have already seen with the gameplay trailers that have already been revealed that when you scan a planet, you are given basic information. This will be its flora, its fauna, its water, resources, and a few other key details. So as part of the foundation of the procedural generation side with these planets, it's including these as part of the rule set. Each planet will have its own separate rules of what's actually included. Will there be wildlife? If so, what type of wildlife? Will there be plants? If so, what type of plants? Will there be water? If so, is it radioactive? Is it safe? And then it will also list out resources, with there also being percentages linked to those resources to highlight which ones are common, which ones are rare. This is the basic foundation. On top of this, there will be additional rule sets which apply for certain things that could potentially happen on that planet. Any type of collectibles, loot, gear, dynamic events, all of this is layered up. And it means on a surface level, if you were to go and visit a planet and your friend was to visit the exact same planet, you would still have the same content. You'll still see the same wildlife, the same plants. There'll be water on that planet if it's as part of that rule set. Even dynamic events and certain gear and loot, but you'll have to look for it in a completely different place. It will not be in the same place as your friend, making each experience different. But there have been games in the past which try to procedurally generate absolutely everything, and it's led to some pretty weird instances, and also some pretty boring gameplay. So this is where the next level comes in, because procedural generation would be there to build the planet, but Bethesda are going a lot deeper. Any type of main structures, story elements, even the animals and plants themselves, they will be handcrafted. And it's actually a very good comparison that we can make. No Man's Sky, when that was first released, everything was procedurally generated. Planets, creatures, and ships, absolutely everything. And on release, especially with the creatures, there were some very weird creations. And in some cases, it was game breaking. The creatures in Starfield, however, are not procedurally generated. A designer's gone through, they've planned everything to do with a specific creature, they've then handed it over to an artist, and an artist has gone through to add all of those fine details and pretty much make it come to life. So that the procedural generation side of things is only to build the planet with its rule set, but when it says we need wildlife and this is the wildlife that we need, it's going to take something which is handcrafted. It's the same with the structures. If it is a specific structure that is needed on a planet because it's an enemy outpost and you want to have some combat in that place, that also is not procedurally generated. That is handcrafted, and then will be brought into that world as part of the rule set. And that's where those finer details will come in. One of the best examples is the planet Jemison in Alpha Centauri, because on this planet is New Atlantis. New Atlantis is going to be the biggest city within the game, and not just that, it's the biggest city that Bethesda have ever put together in any of their titles. This is where you're going to be spending a huge portion of your time. It is the capital city of United Colonies, and is also where you'll find the headquarters of the Constellation. There's also a few other factions around this area as well. There's going to be a lot of content here, not just within the main story, but a lot of side quests as well. And based on how it's been built up, the verticality, how big it is in general, this could never be used, not to this level, in procedural generation. It would be a complete mess. Whenever you needed to go and complete a story mission or go through any of the side quests that you wanted to play through, it would be so difficult for you to go and find where certain parts are. The algorithm to actually decide how the procedural generation would work would need to be so in depth just for it to be compatible for players, so they had an understanding of what to do, where to go, and pretty much do what they need to go and do within game. So every little detail about New Atlantis is handcrafted. However, if you were to go outside of New Atlantis, there will be parts of the planet of Jemison which is procedurally generated, because it's not as vital to the story element. Although with how highly detailed New Atlantis is, it may be the case that you don't really want to explore the rest of the planet and that you do just want to go and stay within New Atlantis. So with all of this in mind, going back to what we said right at the beginning of this video, normally when people talk about procedural generation, there's a bit of unease. Some players would love games which go a lot deeper, everything being handcrafted, but of course for the developers that means it's going to take a lot longer. With procedural generation, it takes less time to actually build these massive worlds, but they tend to not be as immersive. Bethesda are going for a blend. Procedural generation to build these massive open worlds, and in this case quite literally massive open worlds which tend to be planets, and then there's going to be handcrafted elements. What I'm very much interested in seeing is how this does actually blend together. It may be the case, and what might happen with a planet such as Jemison, where there's not actually too much on the planet itself, and then all of a sudden it gets extremely hectic. A massive city of New Atlantis where everything is covered, but as you travel around the rest of the planet, there just happens to be nothing to actually find. And we also know not every single planet is created equal. There are some which naturally are going to be in better places within their solar system. They're going to contain life, they're going to have resources. It's going to be a perfect place to build outposts. There's going to be dynamic events, collectibles, even story elements on those planets. But with others, they're not going to be as important. It has already been confirmed that out of all the planets that will be part of Starfield, only 10% of them will have wildlife. This is a number which has already disappointed fans because they wanted to go to each and every single one, find something different on every planet, but at the exact same time it also makes sense because life across every planet isn't something that is common, and that's just talking about real life. So in terms of it being reality, this somewhat makes sense. But it does mean in terms of gameplay, what else will there be? If there's no wildlife to scan, there's no plants to scan, what's the incentive to actually visit that planet? Bethesda have already revealed a few other things in terms of dynamic events, different types of activities that will be ongoing, as well as collectibles, but they're also holding a lot of extra stuff back. So with this, we'll just need to go and wait and see. Overall, the strategy of going with procedural generation with handcrafted elements is probably the best way for this type of game. If you enjoyed this video, then I highly recommend clicking the next video on screen. That video goes through 48 details that you should know about before Starfield is officially released. We're getting closer and closer to the release date, so you don't have as much time to actually go and watch that video. So click that and I'll be over there to guide you through absolutely everything.